Yes, now I will be talking a little bit about a node project and getting like a very simple web server up and running. To begin with, I'll talk a little bit about not so much code, but kind of what a node project normally consists of. There are a couple of files that is very relevant that you kind of have to know about what they do, and maybe what the content of these things are. So let's start from the bottom. There's here a file called readme.md. The readme file is normally a file you use for explaining what your project is doing. So it could maybe be explaining about, well, this is a web server for getting users data, and then you maybe describe how to run it, how to test it. You maybe have some screenshots of how the app looks, and this is very normal. And this is kind of how the structure of it looks. It's like dashes and the number sign and these kind of thing, and that renders into this, and this is called Markdown. Okay, so there's the readme file. You don't need to have that, but normally there is one, just explaining about the project. Then you have another file called package.json. This is a super important file. This is a file that stores metadata about your project. So for example, some of the things that we can see here that it stores is like the name of the project, what version of the project is this. There can be like a longer description where you write a little bit about like what this project does. And some of these tags, like for example engines, you don't necessarily need that, but it can be nice. But the engines, like, don't worry too much about that. There's an author where you write like who authored this, the license, and then there's 3 other things that you should kind of know what is doing. One of them is called dependencies. And in the dependencies, that is where you store all your libraries for the different projects that that you'll be doing, for all the libraries that you will be using in your project. So for example, in this project, we have one library. It's called Express, and it's this version. And when you want to add a new library to your project, then what you do is you run, like, you say npm install -s means save it here in the package.json file, and then you give it like the name of the library you will use. When you press this, it adds the library to the package.json file, and then it adds all of the files in a module called, in a folder called node modules. Anyways, it's not too important that you remember how to install libraries. You're not gonna do that in the beginning, but it's kind of important that you know that in the dependencies in your package.json file, that is where you store all the different libraries for your project. And this can get quite big. I can try and show you one for a project where we did like a chat application, and you see there's lots of different files here, but don't worry about that. You'll get to learn about those eventually. So you see here in dependencies, we have like lots of different dependencies, lots of libraries that we installed. So the dependencies are projects that we use, libraries that we use in the project. Dev dependencies is libraries that the developer will use for kind of developing this project. So it's not libraries that is relevant to kind of what you will see on the website, or how you will use the backend API, all of those projects should be in the dependencies. But the dev dependencies help make the developer's job a little bit easier. And here we have a project called NodeMon, which is like monitor some node code. Yes, okay, that's the dependencies, and it's the dev dependencies. Then we have another one that is quite important, and it is this one. It's called scripts. In the scripts, you can make any script that you want, meaning you add a key and a value. What it does is when we run start, it'll just run this script here. So what does that mean? How we run a script is we say npm run, and then we give it one of these names, dev, start, or server. So if I write dev here, npm run dev, that will kind of run this this command, which is then running this one. That's maybe a little bit confusing. I'll try and use one of the other ones. Npm run server. If we run that, that will be exactly the same as running this command here. So this is exactly the same. So what we do in the scripts is that we kind of add shortcuts. It's like a shortcut so that we don't have to write this super long command every time. It makes our lives a little easier as developers, because the only thing we have to write is we have to write npm run server instead of writing nodemon ./source/ backend / blah 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 blah, and these can get quite long. So it's nice to have like shortcuts for that. Okay. And normally there's these kind of scripts. Dev is like develop my site. Start is normally like run the server that is running. That's usually when you put it on a server, then you run npm start, and then everything is kind of working. But npm run dev is nearly used everywhere, and it's used for development. Okay, so now you see here that if we write npm run start, that will just run the command node and then this simple web server. Whereas if we say npm run server, that will run nodemon. So now the question is, of course, what is the difference? Okay, nodemon will listen for changes in this file here. When a change happens, then we will run the script again. Okay, why is that important? Well, let's say we don't use npm run, we don't use nodemon, we will just use node. So npm run start will run this one. Okay, now I'm running this file here. Don't get too I'll just comment this out. Okay, if I write some changes here, right, for example console.log2, and I press save now, nothing happens here. Okay, that's because we've just run the simple web server and it never changes. It's just running that file as it was when we ran the command. Okay, but when we're developing on this, we are constantly changing the files. We're changing a little bit here, changing a little bit there, and there we want, every time we save it, we like to run it again so we can see our newest changes. Okay, so when I press save here, nothing happens. Okay, so I'll say npm run dev instead, and the dev script ran the nodemon simple web server. So let's see what the difference is. We're seeing the two, but now say I don't want to log out to. I'll just delete it, press save, and now it will rerun my server. Okay, and now it's not writing to. I could also write like right, and I press save, and now it reruns everything. Okay, so the smart thing about that is that we don't have to run npm start write, and then we see, oh, now we have the newest change. Now I want to delete this, so I delete it. I have to save. Now I have to close down the process, which sometimes takes a little time on my computer. I don't know, right? So we'll just start a new one. npm run start, and now I have to write npm run start again, and now I can see the changes there where it's not showing. Okay, so it just makes our lives as developers a little easier, because it'll just listen for changes and then run the script again. Okay, cool. Now you have like a pretty good grasp, hopefully, of the package.json, what it does and what we can use it for. There's a package log.json. That's saving information about the current version of all the libraries that we are using. Don't worry too much about this. You won't spend time on doing any changes here. The gitignore is kind of important. The gitignore file tells Git what files we want to commit to Git and what files we don't want to commit. Okay? When you have a project like this, you get a lot of files, because when we install, for example, a library like Express, installing that library is taking up a lot of files, and I'll show it to you. If we go to the node modules file, we'll see here the only library that I have installed is Express. And look at all these different libraries that Express is then installing, right? There's like probably hundreds. Imagine if we put all of these files into GitHub. It would completely crash, and it's not really it's not what we should use Git for. It wouldn't crash, but we shouldn't save all these files in node modules or in GitHub. So in the gitignore, we say that all the files in node modules, don't add them to Git. Okay, that's super important. And there can also be other files that you don't want to add to Git. Typical ones is like the environment variables, where you store like passwords and usernames and stuff like that. And yeah, there can be some other files that you don't want to add to Git. Okay, cool. So you know about the README, the package log, the gitignore, and then the node modules. And the node modules folder is where we save all the files for all the different libraries that we are using. Okay, nice. Yeah, I think I'll stop it now, and then I'll do another one focused a bit more on the web server. Cool.